Okay.
On stage. All right. I'm looking at the AV team at the back. Do I get a thumbs up to get going? Super. All right. Firstly, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is the first session of LearnX. I know that there are a bunch of sessions that are happening right now. I'll make sure that we are wrapped up at 9:45. I know you folks have a lot of places to go to. Just very quickly, some housekeeping items. Throughout the day, there are LearnX sessions happening in the rooms right across here. Feel free to go into whichever one you want. The organizers informed me that if you are in a special workshop, like the threat hunting workshop or the workshop done by the Ontario Centers of Excellence, you would have had to have a separate registration for that, so make sure you have that handy. Career Expo is open, I believe, until 8 p.m. for the gala night, which starts at 6. Thank you, I needed that to wake up. For the gala night that starts at 6, make sure you have your wristbands. It is a long day, so if you stay, I look forward to seeing you there as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump right into this. My name is Ali. I lead security for YES, the Youth Employment Services. I'm also an advisor at CyberX, and I teach at a bunch of institutions across Ontario. And today's discussion focuses on a term that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with, Femtech. Some might be, some less so. I've always believed that technology works well when it brings people together. But I'm not quite sure where we're at and how we've come together around concepts around security and Femtech. And that's what we're going to focus on in the next 40 minutes. Before I begin, I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves, and a shout out to everybody that is watching online as well. I'll do my best to log on to Cyber Exchange to take any questions. Firstly, she's a good friend of mine, someone who's also helped me a great deal in understanding networking in the cybersecurity space. Helen, please introduce yourself to the audience, and tell me, why is this conference important to you?
My name is Helen Oakley, and I'm lead security architect at SAP. I'm also co-founder of leading Cyber Ladies organization for women in cybersecurity. We have our booth, please visit us. And why is this important for me? Because women in cyber are underrepresented in cybersecurity community, and it's very important to raise and elevate women in the industry and also build strong allies in cybersecurity to support and promote them in this vibrant career.
I agree. You can't become what you can't see, right? Helen, always a pleasure. Third year or fourth year going, it's always a pleasure to be here with you. Kat, all the way from the exotic land of Waterloo, welcome to Richmond Hill. Please introduce yourself and tell us why is this conference important to you?
My name is Coode. It is so much warmer here than it was at home. It's lovely. I am a data privacy strategist. I have been in privacy consulting for a decade, but before that I spent 13 years at a small company called BlackBerry that was RIM, and the movie is not accurate. I'm just going to throw that out there. But coming from the development world, it was very male-dominated, and a lot of women tended to drop out because they felt they didn't belong. Yeah. So it's important to me to have these kinds of events and take the stage to show women, especially women here, that we're not 20, we've been in the industry for a long time. It is a supportive industry, and you can grow a career here.
You know, speaking of the movie, BlackBerry, me and Pat, we talk a lot about different movies, specifically Bollywood. So imagine a Bollywood movie on BlackBerry. Now, that's got to happen.
If they dance while typing, I'm in.
All right, so we'll be shooting for that very soon. And now, who flew in on her private jet, I believe? Sherry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
WestJet. Sherry Rumbolt. I'm a senior cybersecurity strategic advisor, big mouthful, for the Government of Canada. And I spent 21 years in CAD-PAT, running around with my combat boots on, trying to protect citizens of Canada as well as globally. So I'm a public servant, have been for quite a long time now, and starting to feel a little bit old. Anyways, this conference is so important to me because it brings so many like-minded women together, and it gives everybody an opportunity to network, to see how women, successful women, standing here on the stage and in the audience, have succeeded in their career, and it sets a goal for young professionals that are coming into this industry to say that you belong. So that is one thing that's very important to me, and I think that we've done a really, really good job of raising the bar every single year for the last 4 years, and I'm so happy to see so many wonderful people here today. Thank you.
Absolutely. This conference began right before something called Coode hit us here in Canada, and that was when we began the first conference. And today it's 2023, and here we are. So thank you for your service, but more importantly, thank you for your dedication to the community. And for the first time ever on Canadian Women in Cybersecurity, Carol, welcome to the community. We are cyber, hashtag, please use it. What brings you to this conference? And tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Carol Fung, Associate Professor at Concordia University in Montreal. I am the Gina Coode Research Chair in Cybersecurity and the Internet of Things. So this is my first time to come to this conference. It's very exciting. I think feels so amazing that a lot of people care about cybersecurity now for women. And myself, I always trying to dedicate myself and to foster the women scientists, women engineers, and my focus is cybersecurity. And hopefully in the next maybe decades, I will be able to foster a lot more women engineers, scientists. Yeah.
And just for reference, Gina Coode actually delivered the inaugural speech at the first Canadian Women in Cybersecurity. That was in person, and then the return back to in-person in 2022 as well. Thank you for everything that you do, focusing on the Internet of Things, also referred to as the Internet of Threats. Hopefully we'll get into that discussion as we go forward. So, as my mom always says, you cannot understand what you cannot define. Thank you, Mom. And my mom, if she's watching online, Mom, I told you when I left Dubai, I wouldn't land up on the Jerry Springer show. Here I am at Canadian Women in Cyber. So if you're watching, if you figured out how to log on and you're not still trying to log on to Amazon Messenger, here I am. Anyway, so let's begin with the definition of this term. And I'm going to ask each one of you to define it, all right? In your perspective, what is Femtech? Lady Oakley, let's start with you.
It's a very good question because, like you said, not many are aware of this term, Femtech. Yeah. To me, it's a little bit strange, but not strange at the same time. Why we are specifying Femtech separately from any other technology? I think it's great because, let's say 50 years ago, maybe women's health wasn't as much in attention of everyone as it's today. Yep. And it's good that we're elevating and naming specific technology in that ways that we care about women's health. But at the same time, it's same health data. And to me, to separate that from everything else creates just kind of like putting it on a side and not really putting much attention to it. So we will talk more about this going forward, but to me, it's important because there are definitely a lot of benefits from putting attention and having this technology, but also I wish we would pay more attention into securing it.
Okay. So it's same, but it's different to a degree. Kat, your perspective on this?
So to me, Femtech is software and hardware that helps monitor, test, detect, and recover for health issues. We have, last I checked, about 50% of the population was women. But a lot of the apps and services were never developed properly for women. So I'm going to say pelvic health therapy, and I'm assuming most of the men and half the women don't even know what I'm talking about, but it is a very prevalent field that most women need, and there are now tools to help with all sorts of disorders and issues around women's health. One of the reasons why I'm very passionate about this, because I come from cyber, but I also come from the privacy side, is a lot of the legislations, which we'll get into in the states that are now trying to regulate women's bodies. And so when we have a lot of these health apps that track anything, including like my watch, I had to spend 3 minutes just trying to figure out how to not have it track ovulation, which is ridiculous. But it will track temperature changes and all sorts of things. And again, if you're not familiar with that, my job is to make everyone uncomfortable in their seats. Yeah, so there are all all sorts of signs when you have your period, when you don't have your period, when you're ovulating, and then all of these devices are now tracking that, and so women are now at the mercy of, again, software and devices that are now telling other people about their bodily functions, which shouldn't be happening.
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Put that on a t-shirt. Thank you, Kat. Sherry, your perspective.
Again, you know, this technology that is actually applications, mobile, Internet of Things, and all of these devices are wearables, like Kat mentioned, and we are actually in Femtech. I find that there's not only is it health data and personal data, but it's also talking about very private matters, such as sexual activity, such as, you know, your menstrual cycle, fertility. So a lot of that data is also combined with not only health data, but it's actually, you know, tracking via AI and all these other things, your personal life. So, I mean, you know, you have to be very mindful of that. And I think that there's not enough information out there that actually gives women the opportunity to choose what they want to provide. Because, of course, most of these apps want all of your data. And some of it is just absolutely not required. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to dive into a little bit more. But again, too, the last I checked, it was like 1,200 to 1,500 apps or more that have been created since 2016. Some are funded by governments, so everybody and anybody is creating apps for Femtech, and not all are created equal. And I think that that's one of the things that we should be concerned about.
I think super important. The personal is political. And one thing that I do before coming on to these sessions, the CyberX team gives us a demographic of who's attending. And not everyone is specifically in the technical line of cyber. We have people studying sociology, philosophy, psychology. I hope you're starting to see those intersections that we're going to be diving into, which are super important in the world of security and making it more inclusive and more integrated. Sherry, as always, thank you. Carol, your perspective on how do you define Femtech?
Okay, so Femtech, my point of view is it is new technology that can collect data from women and regarding their health. As Sherry and the other speakers already mentioned, there are a lot of data specific for women's health, like menopause and menstrual health, etc. And the same data are collected like voluntarily. Like, for example, like companies may ask you, to fill information, like report it to them. But these days, because the population of the wearable devices, some data may be collected from you without your awareness.
Yep.
So that could be an issue, potential issue. I think today we're gonna discuss it a lot more on this. And this also, Femtech is actually a new concept. It was first proposed, brought up by IDA team in 2016. It was just a few years ago. And it has gained a lot more attention since then. I think when I saw the data, it was like exponentially growth in terms of the number of articles published on the topic and the number of funding provided to foster that technology. So it is, as speakers already said, the women's health is getting more attention in recent years, and that's a good sign.
Yeah, and I think this element of venture capitalism as well as startup capital that's going into this field is another area, because what's driving some of those investments and what's the ROI that's expected from these tools? Great introduction. Thank you very much for that. Now, Kat, when you began, you referenced the regulation of women's bodies. And I want to ask you a question, and then we'll go to Helen, and then we'll come to the two of you. Is this industry in specific need of very specific regulations? Your perspective?
That's a good one. So in the States, there's HIPAA, which is what protects health information. And that health information in the States is actually only protected if it's created by a health practitioner. And a lot of people don't realize that. In Canada, we're better. In Canada, we're better. We say any health information is health information. Yep. So that the bigger issue is in the States, because if you buy a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or anything like that, it's actually not covered under legislation at all. So I think the backup here is to regulate consumer health data instead of just medically generated health data. That's where we need to be globally, really. And what's happening too is we have a lot of existing apps that are adding period trackers, that are adding other things to it, right? So those apps have just, again, like look at Fitbit and Apple Watch, were health products, and then they added other Femtech pieces to them, but they're still not protected properly. So we are technically supposed to be protected better in Canada. What they've defined in Europe is what they call like a sensitive data set, and that includes all sorts of things, including, like you had mentioned, sexual activity, but it includes like sexual orientation and things like that. That we need. We need a sensitive, and then Femtech could fit under that umbrella. So we have kind of health data, we have what we kind of deem sensitive data. In Canada, we call it real risk of harm, but we don't have a set of specific things that say this data is more sensitive than others, and that we could use that.
Yeah, and as we go through this discussion, especially when we were planning for this, there's some actual evidences or case studies, if you will, of the misuse of this data, which we're going to come to very shortly. Helen, you sit with an enterprise, large enterprise as well. When you look at Femtech, same question to Kat, in need of specific regulation, do you think?
Kat elaborated very well regulations across North America and Europe. I don't know if I can add any further. She is the queen of data privacy. But I would say from implementation perspective, when we're implementing, we definitely need to think more about the data. We have general data protection, but it seems like when those apps are being implemented, those thoughts are slipping away. And we need more attention during the architecture and design of the software to put into the data protection and how this data is going to be used, because we have a lot of misuse cases as well, how it's being abused and so on.
I want to work with that term of misuse. Carol, I'll go to you and then we'll come to Sherry. Carol, one of the things that you focused on is exactly this, the misuse of this data and some of the privacy concerns that emerge. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Okay, there are many issues. For example, do they have the consent to collect data?
Okay.
And currently, there's usually it's required to provide user consent for people to read, but usually that's too long for a lot of people to read. So people just say yes because they want to use the app, and then they don't know actually what the consent is to. So I can address in a few aspects. First, like for the company side, the data collector side, right? So they need to first know they provide user consent. I think that's required. And the second, data encryption. So once they collect data, they have to save it somewhere, right? So if that's not encrypted, so what if the database is hacked and then all the data will be lost? So I think that if there's any regulation, I think encryption should be mandatory and to add a layer of security. And the second is that anonymity. So when you collect data, can people match the data to some people? For example, you can remove the names and the birthday names. And then sometimes they still want to have some useful data, like know where it is. Like they would say, okay, I'm gonna keep the zip code. So when you have the zip code, maybe it's fine, with the health data, with the zip code. It's hard to match to one specific woman. But if you zip code plus the birth date, then you might be able to match to one person. So that's data anonymity, I think, is one of the issues to be solved. So make sure that data cannot be matched easily to one person specifically. And for the user side, so when user choose to download some app, that user must know what she is going to consent to. Okay, so for example, the user probably don't have the time to read the whole consent agreement. And are there anything that we can do to help them? For example, highlight some of the terms you need to pay attention, etc. Those could be some research topics that we can work on. And on the government side, I think the regulation is very important.
Okay. I'm keeping a track of Twitter as well as Cyber Exchange, and the AV team has sent me some questions on WhatsApp as well. So I'll just try to mix it all together. Sherry, this was something we talked about in our prep session last week. Was it last week or was it 2 weeks ago? I really don't remember. But whenever it was, we did have a prep session, I guarantee you. One of the things that you mentioned was there's a collection of data, which has questions, but then it's how that data is used. And you've referenced racial biases that might emerge from it. Can you elaborate a little bit on that element and the misuse of that particular data?
Well, yeah, because I mean, I think one of the things that I think about is biometrics. So, you know, when we look at different types of biometrics and AI and other types of IoT, it's not all the same. And depending on the color of the skin, depending on, you know, the person, then there's certain apps or certain health conditions or whatever that are not easily detected. And oftentimes I consider that to be a bit of a bias because not everybody is going to be treated equally when it comes to some of this, some of these apps and some of the data that's being collected, as well as insurance premiums and all these other things. So we have a lot of countries that are not as, you know, well, I guess, financially and or having opportunities such as North America. So we look at, you know, other, I guess, underprivileged women that would not have opportunities such as North American women or other women in wealthier countries. So, I mean, they are also underrepresented, so there's a certain amount of bias in there. And I think that that's really unfortunate because in a lot of cases, these are folks that actually probably need this service more than anybody else, but they don't have the opportunity to have that service. And then depending on your healthcare premiums and what you actually can afford in terms of healthcare, there's going to be more options allowed to people. And then we have certain demographics in the world that are not necessarily represented the same as perhaps white people. So I think that that's one of the things that was concerning for me is that, you know, regardless of what the technology is, there is still an amount of AI or intelligence that's built in that will discriminate or segregate depending on what the situation is. And I think that that's something that's very concerning for me as a woman because I think all women need to have inclusion, equality, and these apps should be more readily available for underrepresented women.
Kat, I'm going to come to you because this was, I know that even when I brought it up at the start, there were a couple of eyebrows saying, what do you mean by this? And there have been some cases, specifically south of the border, where you've said, look, this is what we've been talking about with relation to Femtech. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about what have some of these cases looked like?
Yeah, so in some of the states where abortion has been banned, one real example was Facebook was subpoenaed for data. They have since come out, Meta has come out and said, we don't look at the data if we're subpoenaed, we just hand it over. But essentially it was a chat thread between a woman and her mother, and the woman in the Facebook chat had said that she was going to have this abortion, and then the police subpoenaed the chat and then arrested her for having had the abortion because they got it through Facebook. So, and that's not even, I mean, that's not even Femtech. So that is a good example, though, of people leveraging what they have. I mean, you just talked about WhatsApp, right? People leverage the tools they have to have conversations. Is there a safe way to even have a conversation about feminine health? And do we even have protected ways to have that without the thought that the authorities, and you had mentioned there's places in the world certainly where it's not just about women, it's about different people of different backgrounds and different ethnicities that are being targeted. So is there any safe place to actually be online and have these discussions? And so we don't have that, right? We don't have that as anyone in a position where they feel like they're being controlled by the government doesn't have a safe place where they can actually discuss things, and that's pretty scary.
If I can add to this, so myself and Kat are big fans of the Indian Matchmaker show on Netflix. Anybody watch that? All right, so it's an interesting show, all right? It's a very interesting
it's a
show.
very good show.
At least
Look,
it'll be
everybody
on there
confessed to
next.
watching it. Notice everyone's like, yeah, I watch it. Interesting story is, I'm not going to name the organization that revealed this to me, but in 2 cases, now I come from the South Asian diaspora, and the way marriage works is interesting, to say the least. One of the things that started happening is tracking a prospective bride's potential to bear offspring. And on the basis of that, decisions are made if a particular marriage is going to go ahead or not. And it's very interesting to see, terrifying to a degree, how from astrology, which normally tends to be the guiding light when it comes to finding your spouse. However, my spouse found me. I don't know what star she looked at, but whatever, I'm here. But it's very interesting to see that transition. With that said, Helen, you also have a very strong eye on DevOps and how apps are developed, and so do you, Kat and Sherry, as well. The makeup of teams when you're developing such products in Femtech, how does that influence the way the products are made? If it's predominantly male developers who don't necessarily know some of the other side of things, how does that influence the development of such technology?
That's a perfect question.
Once in a while I ask.
So I think it's not only development, it's also the investment in the first place. Yeah, because Femtech is misunderstood, or maybe it's something different for the other half population. They don't know what it is. And I would even compare in a way with cyber, it's like a little bit scary and intimidating. So they don't get to research and invest enough resources into this technology, into new apps and as well teams. So first of all, we have lack of investment to progress, to put resources and money into developing them according to everything that we need. And of course, with that, founders have to find other ways of getting their income, right, and investment. And one of the models is, for example, advertisement. And speaking of abuse and misuse cases, Carol and Sherry explained very well, and Carol mentioned consent. So it's very important because right now advertisement is targeting specific data from menstrual ovulation cycles, how women behave. They look at the behavior throughout the cycle. You know, they know that during certain periods, women tend to buy certain things more. Like for, I don't know, before menstrual period, I'll get everyone uncomfortable, yeah?
Potato chips.
Like Kat said, maybe feel more sexual, right? And we tend to buy sexy stuff. Maybe during the period, we tend to buy more homey stuff and, you know, like getting like something for the house, plants or something. So the advertisement is really good looking at the data and looking at the behavior statistics to push certain ads into the apps, into the everywhere that women use it. And similar goes to male. There are apps where male looking after their partners, sometimes even multiple partners, ovulation, and like, oh, I should probably get her something like that. But speaking of dev teams, where I'm heading to, specifically implementation, it is important to have diversity. I mean, it's important in many, in everywhere to have diversity for diverse opinion, for implementation and innovation. But here, it's very important that there are women on the team who understand what it means, who understand how this data can be abused, how the privacy works. Is it really okay to do it in a certain way that it's perhaps done? So it's very important from my perspective. Founders of these applications, of these technologies, absolutely have to have diverse team on their DevOps and development.
I appreciate that, and if my mom's watching, sorry mom, she said a bad word. She said sexy. I'm sorry. Okay, it won't happen again. I want to work with that just a little bit. Sherry, I want to come to your experience and perhaps relating your service on the front lines, again, predominantly a male space, where you had to go through quite a bit in terms of explaining your experiences, what your body was going through different times. Can you talk to me about how important that diversity on the team is in order to ensure that the experience, not just of what you did on the front lines, but the experience of an app, how does that influence that overall development and that culture around that?
Well, I think, too, depending on who's developing the app, there's a certain amount of what I call emotional intelligence involved. And I think that if it's an app that's developed completely by males, how do they fully understand what it is that us women are kind of dealing with on a regular basis? And not only that, too, I read something that was really alarming last night, and that was that some apps are funded by anti-abortion and other anti-groups that are actually tracking and wanting to track information about women that have basically had an abortion or a miscarriage and all these other things to look at and target them in some ways for good or bad, depending on their religious beliefs and all these other things. And that's kind of scary, like absolutely scary. And I think, too, that there's so many different, depending on the sensitivity of what's actually being collected, oftentimes these apps are developed and then there's so much additional information put in there. And I don't want to attribute to my years in service, but I mean, again, it's the same thing, is that not once one size doesn't fit all. And we have a lot of different situations in which you're treated more like an item, not a human being. And I think it's really important that we all consider the fact that we're talking about a very sensitive topic that's important to women, and there should be a certain amount of, I guess you could say, autonomy for women.
Yep.
And oftentimes that's not what's happening. And I think that's really scary. And again, there's so many different avenues for these apps, and oftentimes they ask so much information. And why are developers asking certain types of information? Why is that relevant? Because what it could do is it could track you to your sexual partners. It could track you to your relationships. It could track you to your family. So it's not only you potentially being targeted, you're potentially also allowing for your loved ones to be targeted at the same time. And why is that necessary? I don't understand why that would be necessary. So there has to be opportunity for everybody to consent, which they say they give the opportunity to consent, but like Carol said, oftentimes we don't understand what it is that we're consenting to, because the legalese is really long. And even us as security and privacy experts, I'm sure it's just so much data to even understand or comprehend, because they have so many lawyers that write these things up, and it's done in a certain way that we all lose patience and we just click yes. But it's so important to monitor your cookies. Why are so many cookies built in? Understanding what cookies are, why it's being tracked, because a lot of that information is going to third parties. And there was even another case in which I saw, I'm going to stop soon, that these apps, women had actually miscarried or had an issue with pregnancy, and then days later they were getting ads about pregnancy items and formulas and diapers and this and that. Like, how insensitive is that? I mean, AI is tracking these things, but they don't understand the circumstances of what has happened. And I think that is really, really insensitive. And that's the reason why third parties and all these other things should not be included in the data, but oftentimes it's just readily handed over and we don't even know why.
Mom, are you proud of Sherry? You're voting her for Prime Minister. Look at her. She's got a plan going forward. But working with that, I'll add another important point to this. And this is something that is part of the research, speaking to a couple of firms that have invested in this, is perhaps less on the security side, but on the data science side, the 5 companies that I engaged with that are working in Femtech, only one of them had a subject matter expert that could look at the data and tell you, if you see A go up, this probably means this. How everybody else is inferring meaning into algorithms without necessarily knowing a women's bodily experience or other identity experiences is beyond me. So some of the results that you get as well can be extremely flawed, and what that translates into is a whole other apocalypse that we can get into some other time. Speaking of apocalypse, we have about 7 minutes to go, and I have to rush to another session. I know so do all of you. I want to start off with you, Carol. Carol, some best practices that you would recommend around Femtech, privacy, and security.
Okay, so the best practice, actually, I mentioned earlier, is like there are a few things we need to look at. It's like first, the data privacy, like the security of the data store, how data is stored, like with encryption and some provide anonymity, secure. And that's a data storage part. And the second, and also the security part. So like so for example, data is stored on the system needs to have certain firewalls, intrusion detection, etc., to make sure to actually make it more difficult for attackers to be able to hack into the system and steal the data. And for the privacy consent part, so the user consent apparently is very important. And also there is another thing I didn't mention previously is the like the consent to give out like the permission control. Like for example, like you have your devices, and a lot of times what they ask is like, ask users, can I collect like use this sensor data to collect something from you, for example, your location, like GPS, often they will ask, but a lot of people don't understand So for example, like women's health, sometimes it takes multiple sensors, okay? It's maybe if you give out permission for multiple sensors, they can collect a lot more information from you, and they can derive what you have done, like what you have experienced, and what's your condition of health, etc. And it takes a lot of data collected from you. So if the user don't understand the risk of giving out the permissions, and they probably end up leaked a lot of information. Those information may be stored in the database, but they can analyze it later to figure out what they want from you. Yeah, so that is a potential risks, I think, for users. Yeah. So I hope I have covered most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, for those of you that want to speak to Professor Fung and Carol in general, you can reach out to her. Contact details are available on the CyberX website as well. Now, Sherry, it was Carol's first session with me, so I went by the script. The last question, I can't go by the script. And I did get a question as well from the crowd. So I'm going to throw it out there. Okay. And we have 4 minutes, so let's try to speed through this as quickly as we can. If someone wants to study Femtech or wants to get involved in understanding this from a security perspective, what would be a good starting point?
Well, I think do your research first and see what's out there. Again, like I mentioned, I think there's like 12 to 1,500 apps or so that's getting spun up, and they're spinning these apps up every single day. So, be mindful of who's actually founding these, what the reasons are, and then, the importance of it. And see if it's actually a right fit for you. So, there's a lot of try before you buy, I think, in this case. And I think, too, that, if it's licensed somehow and there's a fee and all these other things, hopefully it's a little bit more regulated. But again, too, we have a lot of regulations that are just not in place for special data such as this, because we're combining a lot of information. GDPR and everything else is not even close to actually being able to cover these regulatory stuff. So, hopefully that answers your question. I'll let the other ladies speak.
Kat, speaking of regulations, Canada in a better position compared to other jurisdictions in your perspective?
We are, if people are unaware, we have 13 different health regulations, like every state and territory has their own. But we do tend to look at things like if you were releasing an app, as an example, in Ontario, you have to have audit logs and everyone has to access things differently. We don't have that everywhere, so we know who's in what data. But yes, we still don't have the regulations to control this kind of data. Another weaponized example in Florida was period trackers they were distributing to high school girls to try and out the trans women. So there's ways to use this stuff in a positive way, and then there are ways to weaponize. So my little 2 cents is you basically need to ethically hack this stuff. You need to hire people who look for worst case scenarios, because you're developing an app with that intent, and we do this all the time for things, right? We ethically hack and we say, well, what else, how can we break this? We need to have people who understand women's health and other things and say, how else could you use that data? How could you weaponize this data? What could you do against someone if you had this data?
Tough competition for Prime Minister as well, actually. Now, speaking of ethically hacking, a shameless plug for a session that Helen's going to be doing towards the end of the day on hacking. So if you've never done it before, what are you going to be teaching our audience later on this afternoon with regards to hacking?
It's about everyone should learn to hack. So come over and learn why everyone should. And this is a perfect example why. Yep. And when we're talking about hacking and developing apps, this is a perfect example that you need to test, you need to think about this edge cases and misuse cases. And you know what, even if on your team there is not enough diversity, and we know we're all struggling with that. Yep. Ask your mother, ask your sister, or somebody in the family or close to you, bounce it against them, right? Are they comfortable that their data is being sold about them this way? Are they comfortable if they can be tracked this way, or even used by government or anybody else in any kind of weaponization type of way? So I would just encourage to think through and encourage to development to put more attention to that, and definitely hack to test it.
Everyone should learn to hack. You can check the agenda. It's spread across the conference floor, or go to cyberx.org/agenda. With that, the mic drop moment is on me, so I guess I'll have to think about something smart to say. But before I say that, thank you, everybody, for joining this session. I know it was early, but I love the support, love the energy. And I always tell this to my students, right? The opportunity here is rife. Technology is a name you give to something that's not quite working yet. And there's an opportunity over here. And what you've heard from our panelists here is not a rejection of Femtech, but the need for more responsible development. And I'm just going to put this out there. Responsible development or ethical AI and all of these things is not about leaders sitting and developing policy around it. It's actually about understanding the people, process, and technology behind Femtech. If you don't know code, at least know the basics of what happens in the back end and the front end. If you don't understand privacy at large, at least get some of the basic concepts in place before you formulate a decision on which apps to use, which applications to move forward with, so on and so forth. With that, I thank you all once again to these wonderful ladies. They'll be around if you want to take pictures and autographs. They said cookies too many times, so I'm going to go and grab some, and then I have another session. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful conference.
Good job.
Oh, thank you.